Assalamualaikum and hello. You are listening to IIUM FM, your campus radio. So I am your host Nafisa.
And I am your co-host, Syakirah.
So for our brand new slot for this semester, My Research, which is a program that is interview-based, where we go behind the scenes on researches being conducted by our very own lecturers here in IIUM. So we will go around and explore the various matters pertaining researches in the world of academics. So joining us today here is our very own Dr. Shafizan Mohamed, Assistant Professor in Kuliah of Human Sciences in Communication. Welcome, Doctor.
Welcome, Doctor.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, even though as student of communication department, you're quite familiar. We take your we take your lectures and we are familiar with it. But for those who are listening or watching from other kuliahs, could you just brief us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I just want to say thank you to IIUM FM for inviting me today. There's nothing much to know about me. My name is Shafizan. I'm working here at the Department of Communication. I've been in IIUM for more than 15 years. I'm born and bred in KL, so I think that should be good. You need to know my age?
Yeah. All right. Sorry?
It's okay, never mind.
So your top. Sorry, there will be a little bit of lack of synchronization because it's online, but hopefully you can get work with it. So your topic for your research this time around has been on title research on news coverage of election. So before this, I mean, your educational background itself is on new media technologies, as well as your PhD topic has been on political blogging. So could you just brief us a little bit about why and how did you come about to choosing this topic, and tell us a little bit about it?
Okay, all right. Well, doing research on election is just one of the research that I do, okay, but it's under the bigger umbrella of political communication. My interest in politics, I did since I was young, because I think I've been exposed by my family from a young age. It's not that my family are politicians or political, it's just that we talk about it at home. So because through the conversations, I get a bit fascinated with what politics can do, about power struggles. And of course, when I was younger, I was quite the idealist. So I found a lot of problems with politics, and I don't like politicians, things that young people think about, right? So I thought, okay, this is something I want to study about. And because I do think also, at that time when I was younger, I was thinking, young people don't like to talk about politics. What more study politics? Maybe I should do it. So that's why I proceeded with my PhD in political blogging. Because at that time, blogging was very popular. But I noticed that young people, would prefer to blog about lifestyle, about, fashion. They don't like to talk about serious things. And I thought that, politics is serious. Politics is something that, actually define your livelihood. So, it started from there.
I actually agree with Dr. Being said that talking about politics is such a taboo at a young age, especially at home, right? Not many families would allow their kids to be involved in politics. So it's good to hear that Doctor herself at home is talking about politics. It's fascinating, actually.
Yes, yeah. So that's where it started, and I hope that by doing research, I would know more. And now that I am teaching, that I could also share in class. And I hope that my students will pick up. It's not really about being interested in politics per se. It's just that interested in knowing that what politics is and how it determines, how it influences your life. Things like that.
So, to begin with, on your topic, on your research topic this time around, title research on news coverage of election. Why did you come about choosing this topic?
Okay, all right. So actually, it started out during the last election, okay, the GE14, which was very controversial and very unique election. Okay, we were commissioned, me and several of my colleagues, by Professor Syed Arabi Aidid. Because Prof. Arabi is the head of the Election Studies Unit in UIA. So it is a big research unit that study elections every year. And he has done it since the 1960s. So he commissioned us to study different areas with regards to media coverage of elections. And I was given the task to study news coverage, online news coverage, as well as not just online news, also online platform, Facebook and Instagram. So that's where it started. And when I started doing it, I became really intrigued, because once you are doing a research, you become engrossed with your case. I keep observing the Facebook posts of all the politicians during election, and I can see, how they develop and the content that they use, how they try to, for example, in that context, to personalize their image, to attract the, what we call it, audiences, the electorates. So these are the things that made it interesting for me to continue my study on elections.
So how about, so the focus this time around has been the upcoming elections that are going on?
Yes, okay. Currently people are talking about, the probability of having GE15 very near, but personally, I don't think that is going to happen, because the public does not want it. Okay, but in between, we have a lot of by-elections, the small elections or state elections. But it's just that I think the change in politics today is very fast. As you can see, we had a change in government. Last year it was a new government, this year another government, and probably next year another one. So the change is very fast and very dynamic. And of course, as a media researcher, I think media has a lot to do with that.
I absolutely agree with how media is influencing the politics, arena. And before we go further with your research, I would like to talk more about politics and youth, as you have mentioned before, right? As a researcher in politics field, do you think that more youth should be involved in politics?
Okay, being involved, we don't need so many people to be directly involved or become politicians, but everyone, the youth especially, must be very aware and must be very conscious of their political surroundings and what politics can do to their everyday life, especially because young people are the future generations. We cannot have a gap, that young people do not care about politics and suddenly when they're 50, they suddenly care about politics. We cannot have that. It has to be continuous. I think you can see for yourself today that a lot of our leaders are quite old.
Yeah.
So there will be a generation gap. Okay, and we cannot have only a certain group of older people to decide for the country, because young people are the drivers. So young people must understand that politics is more than just going to vote. Okay, and politics is not just what they read in the newspaper. Politics is knowing your responsibility, knowing and understanding why you have to go to vote. Because I know some people would argue, it's the same whoever you vote for. All right, politicians are all the same. But while there may be truth in that politicians, they have some kind of, they can be sometimes power crazy, but you must understand that each politician have a certain stand. Or in Malaysia, because our politics are very partisan, they are part of, for example, UMNO or part of PAS. You must understand each of these party, what do they stand for? Okay, and which of these party is most relevant to your own values and your own beliefs. We, for example, may not be in agreement with 100% of UMNO. Okay, but there are certain areas in UMNO, for example, what their principles, their values that may still be adaptable to some groups, and those groups who wants to support UMNO, for example, must be educated enough, okay, to in the sense that you can support UMNO, but you must also bring UMNO into a better, for example, not to not look so quite race-centric or ethnic-centric. So all of this can only be done by, I believe, young people.
That is very enlightening, because I also believe that young people is the will shape the future. So they should be more aware on politics. So talking more about your research, right? So we know that research could be done on primary sources and secondary sources. So we would like to know which platform or sources that you are going for on your research.
Okay, of course, it depends on what your objectives are and your specific research problem. Now, with regard to the news coverage studies, okay, I have been referring mostly to secondary resources because I'm looking more at the papers as well as other documents. But sometimes, okay, we do try to strengthen our study by doing interviews, and going to the ground. For example, when I do the newspaper coverage study with Prof. Syed, okay, with Prof. Arabi, we will do the agenda setting function or agenda setting study. So in agenda setting, there is two categories. You have to study the newspaper and you have to study the public opinion. So to do public opinion, you need to do survey. And to study the media content, you need to do content analysis. So there is a combination of these two methods. So most of the time, we will use both primary and secondary sources.
All right. So so you'll go for public opinion on surveys, right? So that would mean that your research will need you to interact with people.
Yes.
But due to the current events, we are all affected and we're all doing it online. So how has the pandemic affected your research?
Of course, the pandemic has significantly affected my research. We need to focus more, not really because of we want to, okay, because of the circumstances. So we need to adapt with our research methodologies. So we have to depend more, for example, on online surveys. So with online surveys, there is the strength and weaknesses. The strength is easier. But the weakness is you can't get significant data from the people. Yeah. But with the with the pandemic, there are more interesting topics to look at, to study at. For example, I am still studying content analyzing media coverage. So we look at how newspapers' coverage of the pandemic affects their coverage of politics, for example. So there are, of course, it's how you look at it, be positive and negative. But of course, there are the challenges, especially now you are stuck doing research at home. So it's good to be more technically savvy. But at the same time, it's not hard when you have children to take care of us. So there has been some challenges, for me to complete my research work. And of course, there's the issue of motivation. You wake up, you're at home, 10 hours later, you're still there. So the motivation to sit down and work, because sometimes research, to make it interesting, you go out, you meet people, you discuss with your colleagues. So I think that the main challenge for me is not really conducting the research, it's really motivating myself to do the research.
I could totally relate to it, and I'm kind of, it's same as students. Trying to motivate yourself to follow a work ethics during this time. I can't imagine how would it be to create researches at this time in your home. So yeah.
Yes, it's a challenge for all of us.
Yeah. I think everyone can relate to which extent it has hindered our progress. So I would just like to ask whether on conducting your research online, right? Do you think that conducting it hinders you from like catching a wider coverage, like as if when you disseminate your survey, do you get a lot of responses, or does that limit your respondents?
Sorry, you're asking if I'm doing survey during the pandemic?
Yeah. Conducting it online, does that hinders you from casting a wider net that helps your research?
Okay, all right. Doing it online, of course, it's great because it's easy and you can get general response. But it is hard if you want to look at specific, or you want to sample specific group of people. For example, I am also doing a research on how B40 children, children who are living in the pusat perumahan rakyat, okay, how they their media literacy. So I cannot use online surveys to study them. So that kind of research I need to put on hold, whether I like it or not, because to reach those kids, you cannot use Google Form. They don't have access, and even if they have access, they won't know how to sincerely answer the questionnaire. So there is a limit to that.
So it does at some level affect some of your research.
Yeah, definitely.
So going back to the title, to the topic of election, what do you think it has been the defining factor or observation from your side on how news has been covered during the pandemic compared to the previous election?
Okay, during the pandemic, we've only had one by-election, and then we had a state election in Sabah. When the media covers it within the context of the pandemic, you can see that the coverage on the election has decreased a little in comparison of election without the pandemic. But I can see also that the repercussion of the election has become more interesting to study. Because if we're talking in relation to the pandemic, because instead of people talking about the election in the sense of going to vote, about changing the government, it has changed the narrative into people talking about why the election and the narrative has now become it's as if it is the people against the politicians and the election. So the narrative has changed. So the context of the pandemic, has really affected how election is looked at. As well, I think that the newspapers also are becoming more careful in covering, elections and politicians and politics, because this is a good thing, because it shows how audiences and the public are becoming much more wiser and having more power in telling, the media or the politicians what they like and what they don't like.
Other than that, in terms of the international, is it also because your focus has been on Malaysian election, right? But currently the US election is also at its full force. So in terms of coverage on international election, is there any any personal observation that you can provide us?
I think, of course, my area of study is Malaysian media. The Malaysian media coverage of the US election is there, but I don't think it is always part of some international news, because domestically we already have such interesting political stories and political controversies that's going on, as well as the pandemic. So with regard to the Malaysian media coverage, I think there's not much emphasis on the US election. But one observation I would like to do in comparison between Malaysian election and US election is the contribution as well as the participation participation of the public. Okay, because in the US, you can see everyday people, promoting let's go voting, you have the celebrities taking a stand. So I think that is an example of, political maturity, where people are free to talk about their political inclinations. In Malaysia, yes, we do have people that talk about politics, but usually they are extreme political supporters. Okay, everyday people, they don't talk about it in a very civilized conversational ways. And then we have, for example, local celebrities. They don't dare to talk about politics or to say, oh, I support this party, I don't support this party, because politics is still seen as something that is, dangerous.
Taboo.
It's a taboo because they believe, if you talk about politics, then people will start, So politics can be very dividing in this country.
It could be also due to the multicultural situation in Malaysia, you could say.
You can say it's multicultural, yes. And this is something, the bad part of politics, because sometimes politicians and political parties, they like to use these controversial, issues just to win votes. Okay, but when we talk about division or sensitivity with regard to politics, it's not just ethnically oriented. If you can see the Malays especially are more what we call divisive when it comes to politics. They don't argue with the Chinese, they argue more among themselves. So this is what I mean, that we have yet to reach some kind of political maturity to be able to talk, okay, I support this party, you support that party, but it's okay, we can have a civil conversation.
So could we expect such changes in the Malaysian society, from your opinion, in the future?
Definitely, and the change is rapid. For Malaysians to vote out Barisan Nasional in GE14, that's a significant indication of change. And you can see the public opinion also changed when they voted out the old government. Okay, they had this opinion of they want a new government. But in less than a year, the public opinion towards this new government is negative. So the change is very, very fast.
We're talking about awareness on to be able to hold a conversation on political beliefs, right? To be civil about it. But we often have seen that people who voiced out their opinions on the political parties, or how politicians are doing wrong, but on social media, right? Because this is the age of social media, and we've seen how law have kind of curbed that kind of opinions, right? Do you think that law has an influence on how our society is addressing politics?
That's a very good question, especially in Malaysia. The law has definitely trained Malaysians to be politically careful.
Yes.
Okay, because we have grown up with watching the newspapers or looking in television about people getting arrested. Okay, we used to have the ISA, where anyone can be arrested without trial. Of course. Alright, but that has also, I think, changed significantly. Most of these laws have been gotten rid of, and then with social media and the internet, okay, there is the government does not have a lot, not as much power of control, even though they still can, arrest someone. But to arrest someone, it must take a really, really big issue. So this is what I say, that young people, for example, if they want to talk about politics, they have to intelligently talk about it. Know where is the line. Okay, you can say, I support this, I don't support this, you can argue, okay, but there are certain things that you don't go overboard. For example, don't talk about the, constitution, okay, about the religion. You want to talk about it, it's okay, but intelligently, right? And personally, I don't think there is any wrong with having a law, because too much freedom, as you can see as well, is not good.
Yes.
Okay, so, and when the government wanted to install the fake law, fake news law. Okay, so many people were saying that it was against freedom of speech and things like that, without understanding that many modern, well-developed Western countries have also adopted the law, because they understand the repercussion of the fake laws. It's not just about controlling people's freedom to speak, okay, but it's also to control peace and harmony. So when we talk about media law, okay, we've got to be more objective and not always think that laws are bad. We always talk, because I think if we take the Western perspective, it's always about media freedom of expression. But we can see that as well, that too much freedom did not work well for them as well.
Yes.
So yeah, we must find some method or system that works for us.
So we've talked about how pandemic has affected your research, right? But do you have any other things that could influence your research, be it before pandemic or after pandemic? Do you experience any problem in conducting your research?
Okay, problem per se, of course, there's always going to be problems, okay? But I think personally, my biggest demon is myself. How much I can achieve, how much I can do, because I think as researchers, there is no limit. Sometimes, yes, okay, maybe if you don't have a grant, you don't have funding to do it, and research is not most of the time not a profit making job. I mean, you can make money from it, but if you make money from it, usually it's hard for you to stay objective. So yes, I think that would be because if any researcher can motivate herself or himself, there's just no limit, I think.
As part of being an IIUM lecturer, you also have to balance between being a lecturer, being a teacher, as well as having your own research. What do you think? What is your stand on this? How balanced do you think your prospect of research to lecture is?
Okay, I think it's not really just about balance, like 50%. What you say? I need research to become a better lecturer, and I need my students to become a better researcher. Because with my research, I have more knowledge and more understanding of the things that I teach in class. And I get real life experience that I can share with my students. And at the same time, teaching and having some discussions with my students to always tell me, hey, this is something that is interesting. I've never thought about that. And when my students talk about something and they realize, oh, this is what young people are thinking about. They see things differently. So maybe this is the problem with the politicians, because they don't see things like this. So it's a combination. And I think research is very important for me to give more to my students, because then it goes beyond just the textbook.
So it influences vice versa.
Yes. It needs one another. And then because if I don't have lectures, then as a researcher, most of the time then I'll just keep the data to myself or to the funder. But at least now I share it with my students, who I hope they will share it with their friends. When they grow up, they become more knowledgeable. Or like when I talk about politics just now, I discuss that with my students and I tell them, you've got to be political, but it does not mean you have to be a politician. So you just have to care more and give examples. So probably that is one of the significance of the researches that I do.
So essentially being a researcher really does help with your work as a lecturer as well, and making your classroom just beyond classroom and textbooks and real life experiences as well. So let us talk about news coverage, right? On election. So we've seen a lot of previous elections news coverage. We've seen it on its television and newspapers and stuff. Do you think that this kind of news coverage would affect perceptions of the mass majority?
Definitely, that's the main role of the media, to set people's opinion and perception about any issues. So how the media covers politics or elections, is truly dependent on their own agenda. All media companies have their own agenda. None of them can claim to be very objective. So this is why I say, this is why we do this kind of research. It's not really just to, report about what media does, but it's also to educate people, okay, that this is the media. That when they cover a certain news or story, they have their own intention. So when you read the news, you need to be able to filter, that you know the context of this particular news, so that we become more wiser and what we consider as media literate. You become media literate, you become politically literate. So this goes back to what the question just now. So I tell this to my students, that you study media, especially comm students. So what sets you apart? That you are media literate, that when you read the newspaper, you don't condemn. You cannot condemn the newspapers to be biased. They have their own livelihood. They need to survive. Okay, so we need to understand that. Okay, and as well, the social media has definitely changed the game. So social media, and then the mainstream media, your traditional media, they are competing with the new media, but they cannot compete. So now that they cannot compete, what do? They adopt. They do what the Twitteries, what do you call them? Those people who tweet. Is there a Twitterina? Yeah. So what those people do, and the newspaper copy it. So, the game is changing. So what's most important is that the audiences also change and understand. Okay, so I think this is the question of media literacy.
We ourselves as public has to have that media literacy to be able to distinguish whether this one is, to balance, right?
Especially this age where media is very, very saturated, very, what we call it, pertinent part of everybody's life. So being media literate is as important as just being literate. Especially in the future, young children, because their world will be defined by the media around them. So if they are unable to maneuver, to understand the context, they can get lost. So that could be very dangerous.
As the world progress and evolve, we no longer has only to be literate. We also have to be media literate as well, right? Yeah. So we talk about agenda of the media outlets, right? Is there any, from your research or your experience, is there any way that we could minimize that? Regulations or the law?
Yes, of course, the law can play a significant part in controlling the media. But in the most ideal way, is not having the law controlling the media, is having the society to control the media. That would be the most ideal. How can society control the media? By, like I said just now, by being literate, by understanding. If, for example, now they see that the newspapers are covering too much sensationalized news, only focusing on politics rather than covering about what can we do to settle the pandemic. So what can audiences do? Maybe they can start to boycott. Maybe they can come up with a campaign. Because at the end of the day, we shouldn't let the media industry think that they are powerful. Because actually the audiences should be powerful. But because now we are just happy with our entertainment news, with our Netflix, that sometimes we happily, submit ourselves to the media industry. When actually we should dictate them instead of them dictating us.
So we talk about how the media have sensationalized the current situation, right? And you said that the public should dictate the media instead of it being we are being dictated now. So taking matters into our hand really needs that media literacy, right? But do you have any kind of suggestion on how we should be able to dictate on what is being put on the media?
Okay, I guess this is where education comes in. And I think this is where most students fail to understand, what they study at the university. Because when you are at the university, it's not really just, memorizing the textbook. It's really also appreciating or understanding the core foundation of what you are studying. So when we study, for example, media, we understand the whole context of the media. So when you have all this knowledge, okay, and you understand how things work, then you can situate yourself within this context, within this system. So going back to that I would say that it starts from there. It starts from education. And education is not just about learning media industries or media laws. It's also being able to internalize, okay, our role as media audiences. For example, as someone who studies the media, who knows the media, you would be able to relate it into your own everyday. That maybe one day when you become the parent, you would teach your children to become media literate. You would be able to filter, or you can even design your children's media consumption so that it would become positive rather than negative. So I think this is where it starts. And maybe we should have media literacy courses in schools, because young children, not even as early as kindergarten or in childcare, talk about what is the best way to use the media. Because they are starting to use the media, even they swipe before they can speak. So we teach them how to speak. We must also teach them, okay, about how to use the media. Okay. So, but if you want young children to be media literate, their parents have to be literate. Their teachers have to be literate. So I guess this is how we should do it. There must be more concern about media literacy.
Do you have a question, Nafisa?
Yeah, I have one question. I think we have to wrap it up soon. So for the last question, we have something from our producers actually. So in your opinion, in terms of a female candidate, what does her appearance, how would it impact her appearance as a candidate? Would you say in terms of her winning?
Appearance, you mean as in physical appearance?
Yeah, physical and media appearance of a female candidate.
Okay, it's hard to be female in politics. It's just hard to be female overall.
Overall, yes.
And especially in our part of the world, okay, where there is still gender stereotypes, okay, and there is still, gender inequalities, okay. So with regard to Malaysia, especially to be a Malaysian politician, whether you like it or not, you will be scrutinized. Okay, your appearance will be scrutinized. If you are too fashionable, then you are not intelligent enough. Okay, but if you are, underdressed, you are the typical boring, you're not really a woman. So those kind of issues will always be there. But I think for any female, any woman who wants to be a politician or just wants to have successful career, we shouldn't take this we should just disregard it. Women shouldn't take these petty issues into consideration. It shouldn't be our limit. If they want to say what they want to say, let them. But if women can support women, that if women and they see, oh, there's a female politician, I'm going to support her because she understands what I'm going through, then that is so much better. And the media, like I said, okay, at first, yes, they can dictate how they cover how a woman is being portrayed. But if there is a demand from the audiences, okay, if there is a complaint from the audiences, they will follow. So yes, so there must always be someone or more people to be brave enough, to just do it. You want to be a politician? Just do it. Okay, but it does not mean you can't being a politician and you have to do things smartly as well. You must understand the context. For example, we are here in Malaysia, all right? Being too openly liberal, for example, wouldn't be so appropriate. So, it's got to be within the context. For politicians to be very sexy, you will never be taken seriously. So it's okay for, if some women just like to look good, you can look good, but of course be wise and understand the context.
So talking about women politicians, I really like the recent events with Representative Alexandria Cortez,
Yes.
where she call out how male abusers call her names and stuff. So I think being a woman politician, you need to be able to voice out your opinion and not, absorbing those abuse, right?
Yeah, and it's not easy to be like Alexandra because
Yes.
it's guts and a lot of intelligence.
Yes.
To stand up and back yourself up. Yeah, so it's not all, unfortunately, I don't think not many are ready to do that. Yeah, but I think she's a pioneer.
Yes. It takes a lot of courage and bravery.
Yes.
All right. I think it's we're coming to the end of our session today. So to wrap it up nicely, right? Being a researcher in this politics field, would you say if you have the power to impact decision making and news coverage of elections, do you have any suggestions or things that you would do towards the news coverage to improve?
Okay. Obviously, there have been many suggestions, many researchers, many ideal ethical principles that have been pointed out. Even in our textbooks, we already have all these, what we call it, values. They say this is the ideal way to handle a media industry. This is the best way to become a journalist. So I don't think my research would add to that. In terms, we already know what is the best way, what is the ideal way. But I would prefer that my research help the everyday people understand. Okay, that it will help the public understand. Okay, the media is like this. So how am I going to respond? Okay, how am I going to make it beneficial for me? So I think that is the impact that I hope I can create. Because to advise the media company, they already know. Okay, to advise the government, they know. Okay, but to advise the public, whether they can accept it or not, there is still a chance. I can talk to my students, and it may change the way they look at things. So that is for me, that would be my main way of change, I think.
This session has been very, very fruitful. Thank you so much, Doctor.
I hope it has been.
Yes, it is.
Has been.
All right. Okay.
Your precious time. I know staying at home, you want to spend time with your kids as well. But thank you so much.
Being here on a holiday. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes. But with this pandemic and this lockdown, okay, holiday, not holiday, is just the same.
Yeah.
Time concept is not really there with this pandemic.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
All right. So
Thank you.
good job. Okay.
Have a nice day, madam.